Hey there, welcome back to Digging In. This is a video series that allows us to really do a Bible study of a text that we'll be looking at here at Sunny Slope. So if you attend Sunny Slope, this gives you kind of a behind the scenes look at how do we come to an understanding of what the text is all about. So it kind of gives you essentially I let you kind of or invite you to kind of look over my shoulder as I study the text, and that way when you hear the message, you can get a sense of what is behind all of that. Now, normally I start off the video series or the video with some time breaking down the text. I really think that's an important part of good in-depth Bible study is to be able to follow the flow of thought in a text. And usually to do that, I'll break every passage down into a series of smaller pieces, usually just one phrase or one sentence at a time. Now, when I went to study this passage, I realized that I'd actually preached on it, a number of years back. And so I had already done that homework. And just kind of the way my week was, I decided I wasn't going to reinvent the wheel. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the text in front of you that I basically what I did and what I studied a couple of years back. And so you can see the formatting, you can see kind of how the whole text breaks down. But I want to kind of spend a little bit of time um, breaking, kind of digging into the meaning of the different themes and ideas of this text. And one way to do that is by paying special attention to the different words, to the grammar, to some of the details of a text. And we can do that in a few minutes of just kind of overview. And that gets us ready for the final phase, which is really the more kind of reading and reflecting on the overall message of the text. So let's jump in and let's get started on this. It starts off by the waters of Babylon. There we sat down and wept. Now, I noticed when I was reading through it, I noticed that there's kind of a repetition, and I'm going to use black ink for this, where it says there, and it repeats that several times, and that maybe is by way of emphasis. The psalmist is writing he's speaking of a location, and actually, as it turns out, there's a number of locations mentioned. There's Babylon and there's Zion. Zion again down here. And then just for good measure, since I already kind of know this, I'm going to highlight Jerusalem. We're going to highlight that let's highlight it in yellow. So Jerusalem, Jerusalem, Jerusalem. Um, and then I also noticed one final location that's given here. Remember the Edomites. And then Babylon again. So we have Babylon two times. We have Zion two times. We have Edom once, and Jerusalem three times. And so there's already, we kind of recognize that location, it's the old law of real estate, right? Location, location, location. This is a psalm that tells us something and exposes something about where the psalmist is. Now, we haven't quite answered the question why that matters and where it actually is, other than these locations, but we haven't really discerned any of the significance of that yet, which we will get to. There's obviously some meaning behind that we're going to find out. Um, so we keep reading, and then actually there's another word that begins to come out where it says, there we sat down and we wept. So obviously Babylon, the waters of Babylon is not a good place. It's actually a very sad place. And the reason given shows up right away. Well, they remembered Zion. So they're in Babylon and they're remembering Zion. Now that kind of the theme begins to emerge there. We see this whole idea of remembering in the text. It shows up at least three times. Babylon, we know enough about our Old Testament probably to know that Babylon is the place of exile. It's the place where the Israelites experienced distance and separation from God. They lost the inheritance they'd been given. They lost the land and the flourishing, their homes, their families, their communities. So Babylon is a place of displacement. Um, so we'll just make that note it's not a good place to be. And they're remembering Zion. Zion, this is, and I said this in another sermon not that long ago, is the idea of Zion as opposed to Jerusalem. Now, Jerusalem shows up too, and that's for good reason. But Zion, when especially the idea of Zion is it's promised land. But more importantly, it's it's the presence of God. So the Israelites, this is a psalm of homesickness, and that's I called the earlier sermon that it's a song longing for home. It's a song the people it's an the psalm reflects an experience of being alienated and longing for the presence of God. Um, and the language that's used here, I actually I think this is not only is it poetic, but you'll notice that one of the ways that the psalmist experienced this comes by way of song. Um, Sing one of the Lord's songs. So this idea of singing just keeps showing up. How shall we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? So there's sort of a poetic idea. What does it mean to sing songs in a foreign land? What does it mean? Then you start to think a little bit. That's a kind of a basic concept, or sort of a principle that we have in common with the Israelites who would have first written this song. What does it mean for us? How do we experience singing the Lord's song in a foreign land? How might that be difficult for us? Now, we're asking a more abstract question, but that question will help us to make a connection with this text. What is it like for us to sing songs and sing the Lord's songs in a foreign land? Um, and that begins as we kind of ponder that a little bit, we'll find something in common. And when we find something in common with the original author, then we can begin to see how does God speak to that? And if he spoke to that to the Israelites, how might he be speaking and ministering to us today? We go a little bit further, so we begin to see. I suppose I didn't think of this too, but we could also add, foreign land here in terms of all these different locations. So location, 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 this idea of displacement or homesickness. Um, I also noticed, and we've done this in a couple of other songs, this is you notice the change in like pronouns. So by the waters of Babylon there, we sat and wept when we remembered on the willows, we hung our liars. This is all first person, our captors, our tormentors. Um, so all of this here is a first person plural experience. That just tells us that um, the psalmist is reflecting on behalf of a people. Now that changes a little bit later. We still have first person, but you'll notice it's down here. It's I and my. And so there's sort of this movement towards increasing personal experience. So we have we here. How shall we sing the Lord's songs? Now, so I would make the case maybe there's, maybe we could do it, yeah, this way. At least there's a break here. This is the most personal experience. So it's personal. And then over here, we'll just call it collective, meaning that the psalmist is writing on behalf of the whole people. He's sharing the whole people's experience, but it just gets more and more personal as you go through. Now we'll jump ahead just a little bit. This last section here, you see the psalmist is now speaking to the Lord about the Edomites. So this is first person speaking to a third person about a third person, if that makes sense. So it's we'll just say 1, 3, 3, meaning it's the first person, it's the psalmist still speaking, and he's addressing the Lord, and he's addressing the Lord about the Edomites, and you see that, and then he's also speaking to his enemy. So still the psalmist, and we know that because there's that vocative "oh," like "oh Lord," that's addressing somebody, and he's first addressing God, and he's asking that God would remember the judgment that was brought down against the people, and he's speaking to Babylon, speaking to the enemy, um, bringing warning about what is to come. Now we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, because there's one more thing I wanted to at least highlight here. Um, and that is over here where it talks about forgetting. If I forget, let my right not forget its, and then if I do not remember. So I see at least a couple times where it's forgetting, um, which is a contrast. And the reason I think that matters is because it contrasts nicely with, so down here we have remembering and forgetting. So it's that question of what is it that you hold in your heart in terms of memory? Like, do you remember home and do you remember the past? And kind of all those themes come together. Now this is just raw material at this point. We haven't really done a lot to crystallize that in, but it's this idea of, yeah, how do we remember and why and what purpose does that serve? Um, so it's yeah. Okay, a little bit further. It's not on the screen. I'll just scroll down. It's going to kind of mess everything up just a little bit, but there's one last thing I wanted to draw attention to, and that's this here. So my highlighting is kind of messed up, but not enough that I'm going to really do anything different here. But I just want to highlight here this idea, blessed shall be he, blessed shall be he. So that's now there's language in there like um especially this last part, like this is one of these lines that if we're really honest, there's a little part in us that says, oh, do we really have to have little ones being dashed against the rock? Um, yeah, that's hard, right? That's a really difficult phrase. What do we do about that? Well, I think there is an answer. It's not necessarily an easy answer, but you'll notice that what the psalmist, and there's one other place here too, where the psalmist is essentially he's praying for, like, lay it bare, right there. That's repeated again. Lay it bare, lay it bare. It's really a prayer that God would deal with enemies. It's really a prayer that God would finally bring justice and judgment upon those who have caused such pain and such destruction, those responsible for the alienation and the exile of the people. Now, one of the questions that begins to come up is, well, who is responsible? Sure, it is Babylon, right? That is true. But is it also a deeper reality? Is it the reality of sin and rebellion in the hearts of the people that also needed to be judged? Well, I'm getting ahead of myself now a little bit, but that kind of gives you a sense of where do we go with this psalm. All right. That is the next step, right? So we're trying to look at a basic study of the text. We want to see what are the highlights and the themes, what are the words that are used, what meaning and significance do those have. Couple of I maybe thought, I don't know if I've said much about this in these videos, but a couple of questions to be asking is, what is it that we have in common with the original audience or author of the text? So, what do we have in common with Israel? We already touched on that a little bit. Because we asked that question, how do we sing the songs of the Lord in a foreign land? What is it like for us to be living in exile? How might we experience that? So that's the first question. The second question then is, what are the redemptive principles? In other words, what does God do to rescue us from this problem? What does he do to bring healing, hope, comfort, strength, redemption, whatever? Where's God's action in the text? And then finally, how do we live in response to that? Now, this is one of these Psalms that doesn't fully answer all these in this text alone. But we always are remembering, and we always have to be asking, how does this text then tie into the greater narrative and the greater storyline of the Bible? That's kind of the perspective and the lens that we come at a text with, and that then gives us the answers and the meaning and the message of the text that we're ultimately looking for, and that helps us to then see, how does this apply to us? Because most of us aren't sitting by waters in Babylon weeping, but are we struggling to sing the Lord's songs in a foreign land? And if so, how can we have hope and encouragement and comfort in the face of that? Well, that's where we'll continue to study. That's kind of where I think the message is going to end up going. So I hope you'll join me. This message will be April 6th, and love to have you join us, be a part of it. Thanks for watching this episode of Digging In.